Hello, it's Susie Walker here from Heartlink Productions, and I'm here with the wonderful Pete Cohen, who is a very, very old friend and inspiration to me. I think, Pete, we met when I was in my New Woman days, which was a long time, about 25 years ago, when you sat in the reception of, it was called Elle Towers then, because Elle magazine was there too. And you were going to see lots of health editors, and I was the health editor at New Woman. We've known each other about 25 years, Pete. Isn't that incredible?
It's a bit scary, to be honest. When people say time flies, it really has. When I look back and think, there's parts of me that feels like that was yesterday, but it definitely wasn't yesterday. It was 25 years ago.
I know, don't tell anyone. But this is Pete Cohen. So if you don't know Pete, Pete is a life coach. He's a speaker. He was a resident on GMTV for 12 years. He has created around 20 books, brilliant, fantastic, life-changing books, and now is host of a podcast, My Intentions, MI365, which is all about intentional living. And I've invited Pete today to talk to us about health and how we can find a sustainable health routine that will work for us. So, Pete, my first question is, how do we do that? I think at the moment we're kind of bombarded by people and by gurus and expert advice around, what we should be doing with our health. So how do we know what we should be doing with our health?
Well, I think the first thing we've got to do is stop. And I know that's a big challenge. This is my prop. I take it with me wherever I go. Because if you want to go somewhere different to where you currently are, I think you've got to stop before you go anywhere and just be curious about where you are. It's very easy for us to judge ourselves, blame ourselves, compare to other people, which is a big challenge that we all face. And just to stop and look at right now, what am I actually doing? What's working? What's not working? And what ultimately do I want? And it's only through stopping that you can evaluate where you are. Because if you don't, chances are you'll do something for a bit, but invariably you'll go back to where you were before. And I suppose the real challenge is creating an identity of someone who is fitter and stronger and healthier. And that's, I would say to people, that's not you. That's the person that you aspire to be. And it's someone who we both like, Dr. Joe Dispenza, who talks about most people today are trying to create new personal realities with the same personality. And our personality is what drives us often to want to change our health, is a dissatisfaction with where we are. We're in pain, we're uncomfortable, there's a prognosis, a diagnosis. So if you want to do something sustainable, I think the first thing is you've got to stop. And then you've got to think about, well, who is the person that you would like to be? Who is that person? And what are they doing? It's like building that relationship to a future self, as opposed to the person that you were, because what got you here isn't necessarily going to get you there. That's going to be going around in circles. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah. So once we stop, how do we, you're right. It's all the beliefs, all the conditioning that we have that got us to this point. And sometimes that's good and sometimes that's not so good. So how do we start unpicking that? How do we, how do we start the process of looking at, this thinking got me here, and then I need to change this thinking? How do we do that?
Well, again, it's that curiosity, right? Knowing that when you step back, which is what mindfulness is, it's about becoming aware, and it's looking at the experience of being yourself. This sounds very deep, but in most cases, there is a debate going on. There is a debating society inside most people's heads when one part has probably said, you know what, I don't feel like this. I'm not going to do it. So if we listen to that voice and we keep feeding it, that's the one that often will have the most prominence in our life. But let's face it, we all have another voice inside our head that wants us to strive on and move on. Otherwise, you wouldn't be watching this. This morning when you woke up, what happened? There probably was the debate started, but who won? Well, it's the one that you probably pay more attention to. And it's very easy for us to put pressure on ourselves. And that voice that maybe is what some people might say negative, it's not going to go away. It's always going to be there, probably in some capacity. So it's making a decision of who you actually want to become. And then in most cases, it's probably a question of starting slowly. And I wrote a book over 20 years ago called Habit Busting. And that really talked about the concept of habit suicide, which is if you do something and you do it for an extended period of time, and then you stop doing it for a day or 2 days or 3 days, chances are when you start again, you're starting again, because you've killed a habit that you've created. So to do something sustainable, I'd say, is always pick something and make that commitment to keep doing it, have a floor and have a ceiling. So for example, with steps, we talked before we went live here today, this article that was on the BBC website about 5,000 steps is enough. Can you imagine how many people are going to go, oh, I don't need to do 10,000 now? Okay, conversation for another day. But people put such high expectations on themselves, let's say 10,000 in a day, and they can't do that for whatever reason. Something happens, they can only do 1,000. Well, that could be a floor. A floor could be 1,000, a ceiling could be 10,000. Set yourself up for success and celebrate whatever you do. You know, that's another huge factor of something being sustainable, is to celebrate, have a floor, have a ceiling.
Okay, so when you say set yourself up for success, so I mean, I know a lot of people think, oh, I know how to create a goal. But I mean, I've been in the self-development industry for years. I ran a magazine about this, but I still sometimes struggle in my own life to set achievable goals. And I think it's because I'm an optimist. I think I can do this, and then I create these massive goals that are far too, you know, extreme, and then fail. You know, so what advice have you got to kind of set really sustainable goals and not set yourself up for failure? You know,
well, you mentioned the G word there, which is goals. And of course, having goals is hugely important. We are what the Greeks called teleological. Everything we do is for goals. But when we set goals, that really I think it just engages just really one part of the brain. It's like it can be a tick box exercise. My thing is around you become intentional, which is where this is so important. And I'm really glad you asked me this, because I wasn't planning to say this. But if there was one thing that people could take away from this, when you're intentional, you know there's going to be resistance. You absolutely know it. Everybody knows if you want something to happen that currently isn't here, it's probably going to take some form of effort, some sort of growth. You're going to be challenged by resistance. So anything that grows outside, you've got the wind, the rain, you've got the heat, it's going to be challenged. If you want to have better health, it's going to be challenging. If you're intentional, you want the resistance. You almost want, I want to not feel like it, because that's an energy that you could use to then do it. How many of us know that feeling? How many of us know the feeling of you don't feel like doing something, you did it, and how great did you feel afterwards? And that's what I would encourage. It's a very simple thing to do, but just notice, I don't feel like doing this. Well, then just do it, because that is the greatest thing you will ever do. I'm not sure, once again, whether that answers your question, but I bet there'll be someone who watches this who goes, that's exactly what I needed to hear, and I will go out and do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Going out and doing things and making it happen is great. I mean, for me, I don't know whether am I setting up myself up for failure when I talk about heart leaps. So when I want to do something, it's something that kind of gives me a heart leap. So when you're talking about this vision of yourself in 20 years time, it's like so exciting to actually, you know, what does that look like? How am I going to do that? But if kind of this idea of accepting the resistance, that's not really a heart leap. So how do I, you know, it's like, oh, I mean, I just started a meditation challenge and I'm on day 3. And this morning I was feeling a little bit fragile and I was thinking, oh, I'm not sure. But I was like, no, come on, I've committed publicly to do this, so I'm going to do it. So this is what I'm doing. Well, but if I followed my heart leap the whole time, I wouldn't do it.
Well, I suppose it's what your definition of heart leap is. And for me, the heart, when I think of the heart, I think of the lion in The Wizard of Oz. And, you know, the heart is having the courage. That's what courage is. And having the courage to do what you don't feel like doing, having the courage to step into something that is challenging. But we also know from research that shows that the heart has a brain-like nature to it anyway, and the heart is communicating with the brain. But I suppose ultimately, Susie, that's where our ability to step back and see what is actually going on, and then maybe make more informed choices about what we do, because that's the biggest challenge in the world, right? There's just too many things that we can actually do. So knowing what best to do and then doing it, I think that's where the magic really is in life, because then it's yours. You own it. It was yours, rather than what's everyone else doing. I know that you've dedicated your life to helping people find their way, but let me just finish this point on what you just said there about personal development. I don't think we're in the personal development game. I don't think of you in personal development. I think you in serving development. And I think you want to serve. And I would imagine most people who follow you, they also want to serve. And it's the empowering question sometimes is, well, how can I serve better? And if I'm fitter, stronger, healthier, I will serve better. And again, it's that different perspective. People don't change when you tell them. People change when their perspective changes.
Yeah, I mean, just you saying around this whole piece about, this is why I'm such a great coach. The whole thing around heart leap is about the heart. It's about courage, and courage is one of my highest values. It's one of those things. So for me, immediately I went ding.
So that's a really good point. I think we don't recognize that every day. If you don't feel like doing something that you know is good for you and you do it, that's a courageous act.
Yeah.
When I think of you and what you've done and what you've walked away from and what you stepped into, and how changing your name. I told some people yesterday about you changing your name, and I said that's a courageous thing to do. I think it's wake up and realize that it is very courageous to be healthy. It is, because it's a game that most people are not playing that game. If we don't have a need to do something, why would we bother? Yet, what a great feeling to step into something and to own what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, this idea of asking about who do we, what does our future self look like, and go towards that. But what I'm always fascinated in, so we're going towards that, we're being brave, we're making those brave, but it's the kind of sabotage, and I think many of us sabotage, and then we feel bad about ourselves, and then we get into this really awful loop of going round and round and round doing that. And as you say, and then you're thinking, well, I want to be brave, and then for whatever reason that day you don't feel like being brave. And yes, it is a choice, we're making that choice, but it's how can we gently, bit by bit. I mean, my company is called Big Leap, which is all about big leaps, but often I feel that it's about the baby steps. So how do we manage that? How do we manage this kind of this big leap in thinking, but when we are feeling bad about ourselves because we haven't perhaps done what we said we, or we've not delivered on the intentions, and then just give in and give up at that point? Oh, well, I knew that wasn't right for me. I knew that this wouldn't work for me. All of that kind of thinking. That's a really big thing that I see myself and so many of my friends, so many of my clients. That is the bit that we struggle with, that it kind of goes down this kind of down the rubbish chute, basically, and then you're back where you started again.
So that's a pattern that many of us fall into. It's a dangerous habit to fall into, because then it can reaffirm the idea that you're not enough. But for someone like you who's highly creative, it's like that's your gift to the world. It's just how creative you are. And I would say your gift is also your weakness. Learning how to manage something that you're good at doing, I think is, for me, again, it's a difficult thing. But in answer to the question, being aware of a few, I worked with 7-time snooker world champion Ronnie O'Sullivan for 2 years, and it was a fascinating time of my life. And I remember having a conversation about winning, which was how much do you want to win? And he hated winning. He hated losing, absolutely hated it. But, we worked on this thing about, if you want to pay the ultimate price to win, then you have to let go of winning, and then you have to be intentional. And I know that sounds ridiculously obvious to people, but if you do the little things intentionally every single day, those investments is what people call the law of compounding or aggregating, that doing something over an extended period of time. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to make those investments because we seem to want everything, obviously, right now in this moment in time. And it's whether you want to play that game, and you have to make that decision, because if you want to play that game, there's no shortcuts. There's no quick fixes to being healthier. Health actually means renewal. That's what it means. So how often do you need to renew your health? Well, probably every day. If you don't believe me, don't sleep. Don't sleep for a day or 2 days and notice how you feel. You become, and don't wait for it to become too late. And you, as you quite rightly said, you probably need some help with that. You probably need an environment where people are going to support you and accountability, because the whole world is in direct opposition to us taking ownership of our well-being. Complete opposition to it.
What do you mean by that? Tell me a bit more about that.
Because we live in a world that no one wants you to. I mean, I don't want to go too deep, but let's talk about health. We don't have a health system. We have a sick care system. So you go to the doctor because you're sick. There's a lot of money in sickness, in getting people sick through what they eat, what they think. Social media has a huge part to play in this as well, I believe. Obviously, what we're eating, what we're consuming, that it's making people sick, and then they'll often take things to not make them well, but to stop them being sick. So we live in a world where there's a crisis of so many conditions: mental health issues, depression, anxiety, cancer, diabetes. These are all inflammatory conditions. Something is inflamed. And if you want to take care of yourself, you're going to have to kind of stop again. And I'm saying it's simple, but it definitely isn't easy, because of the temptation that is out there, and in a world that wants you to overconsume and to maybe think that you're not good enough, so you keep consuming. And I think we've got to stop and kind of look what's going on and decide maybe what is the game that we want to play.
But I think what you're saying, I think what I like what you've just said is it's the honesty of it's not easy. And I think we've kind of been sold so many times, oh, it's easy to change it. It's not. It's a challenge. And with any kind of, if you were going to walk, run a marathon, or you're going to walk up a mountain, you get prepared. You get your rucksack. You find the people who are going to help you, who have got great experience in doing this ahead of you, all of those things. So I think that's why it really helps to, as you be part of something like your community, where it's all about setting intentions. You're around people doing that all the time, and
it's easier.
Yeah,
it's easier. Susie, two quick things. There's a book by Kelly McGonigal called The Joy of Movement. She's a lecturer.
Yes, I love her, yeah.
She's amazing, right? And one of the things she says, which is pretty alarming, 97.3% of Americans, I sent you something around this, I think, 97.3% of Americans, this was a study that was done at the Mayo Clinic. And, that's pretty alarming, right? But there's 4 measurements around that. But then she also talks about when we move, our muscles secrete something that is now known as hope molecules. So when you move, you feel hopeful. And the reason that I think that the brain is rewarding the body for movement, because the brain wants this thing to go. And I think we have to decide, where do we want to go? Where do we want to take this thing? And maybe you just want to take it to the pub, right? But maybe you want to take it somewhere else. And for you and I, who are now in our 50s, right, we want to continue to serve. And I think we are realizing, if we want to serve and enjoy more of life, then there are certain, so what some people might call them sacrifices, I call them privileges. It's a privilege to go and walk, because if I walk, I feel better and I'm investing in me. And it does require different perspectives. What I'm saying here, it might not resonate with everybody, but it might resonate with a few people that go, I've never thought of it like that. Because that's when people change. We change even when someone gives us a different perspective, which I know is what your work is all about, or we have a major stop moment or moments in our life where we go, oh. And unfortunately, the major stops for people is when they have a catastrophe with their health. You don't have to wait for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this idea of changing our minds, I love the hope molecule. That's great. So it's brilliant. So you are hosting a day that I'm coming to, yay, on the 3rd of September in London. Tell me a little bit, just before you go, if anybody wants to kind of know more about you, how do we know about this day, and where can we get in contact with you, Pete?
Well, anyone can send me a message. So we have an event on the 3rd of September. It's called the Magnificent Health Summit. It's online and it's in person. It's in London. The Magnificent Health is all about 7 key elements of health, which is eat right, drink right, think right, talk right, move right, sleep right, and eliminate or poo or poop, as they say in America. We're going to dive into the Magnificent 7, not just with me. It's also Dr. Rakowski, who's one of the top functional medicine doctors in the world, one of the top nutritionists in the world. Him and also Lucy Wyndham-Reed. More people watch Lucy's videos during lockdown than Joe Wicks. Lucy's got over 2 million subscribers. Susie, it'd be great to connect you with her, because she's also a warrior, someone also in her 50s who's saying, I'm not slowing down, I've only just got started. So you can come in person, or you can join us online. It's not just an event where we're going to be talking at you. We really want to help people look at their health with a fresh pair of eyes, and then leave with an action plan of what can you do immediately to start improving your health. So I'm looking forward to seeing you, Susie, in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm going to bring lots of my girlfriends along with me, I think, as well, to try and come and see it. So it's great. Thank you so much for your time today. I mean, absolutely brilliant. I feel so inspired and uplifted by all of these things. And yes, and for me, the big thing that I'm taking from this conversation is that it's an act of courage to look after my health. And that's a real...
So for me, thank you, it is a real thing, isn't it? And just to recognize that. But for me, you know, Susie, what you recommend, what's that word you always remind me of, is reinvention. That we can reinvent ourselves, and the force is strong in you.
Yeah, Susie Skywalker. Thank you so much, Pete, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Lots of love.